Welcome to the Security Gets Serious podcast. This is episode number 5 on July 10th, 2024. I'm Ben Carr, and my interview today is with Richard Greenberg. Richard, welcome to the podcast today.
How are you, Ben?
Good, doing well.
All right.
So, Richard, just giving everybody a little bit of intro about you and who you are. President of ISSA-LA. He's a well-known cybersecurity leader and evangelist, CISO, advisor, and speaker. You've been in the security industry for over 30 years in management. I actually looked you up on LinkedIn. 40 years in total this year, right? So it's kind of.
I was deliberately not looking at
out
that.
there for everybody. His project management, security management, operations, policy, and compliance experience has helped shape his broad perspective on creating and implementing security information programs. So, you know, that's a lot, man. Out there as an influencer, CEO, speaker. Founder of Women in Security Forum. So what do you kind of where do you like to focus? What do you like to do now that you've been doing this for quite a while?
I do a lot of different things. I like the fact that I wake up in the morning and I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to be focusing on to start because I have a choice. Unlike
choices are good.
When I was a CISO, when I know I had to really prioritize and focus on a few things. Now it's like, what am I in the mood to work on?
Oh, you're being attacked by the tree there. Sometimes that happens.
Sometimes it grows.
Push it back. Push it back. Yeah, it's leaning into you. Yeah.
There you go.
We'll have to. Yeah.
So.
All right, the tree's not working. We're gonna have to start over.
All right.
Let's cut this. Well, we could cut this part.
Yeah.
You guys can continue where you're going. This is. I'm just gonna put some weight on it right here. That's really annoying.
You all good?
No, we're good.
See, so I kind of went with it. I didn't let it interfere.
You do. I liked how you did that. You just work with it. We'll start back from. Yeah. All right. So Richard, 40 years experience. You've been doing this for a while. Influencer, CEO, speaker, founder of Women's Security Forum. Like, where do you really like to focus and spend your time now? Like, having been in the industry for a while now, what's your focus?
So I was a CISO for about 15 years, right? And when I stopped. Now I can pick and choose what I want to do each day. And when I wake up in the morning, I don't always know. And that's a luxury, right? But I have like 5 different things that I do, right? And, you know, some morning I'll wake up, I'll go, you know, I got to check to make sure we have enough speakers for the ISSA-LA summit that's coming up. Or I might go, I have my Planet CyberSec CISO forum that's coming. I have to, you know, make sure we have roundtable leaders. And this is actual real things that I was thinking about this week that I did, you know. Or, you know, I need to get a little more business from my Security Advisors LLC. I have to, you know, work on that. You know, the Women's Security Forum, I think we're in good shape. It's happening in October. I think we're good with that. I put on CISO dinners as well, right? So do I want to contact some vendors or do I want to look for sponsors for the Planet CyberSec? And then I have to read up and keep up on cybersecurity and current events and what's going on with that. And that's an ongoing
That takes
thing.
a lot of time, actually, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Here's the thing. Because I'm no longer a CISO, built into the CISO role and function was the learning, constantly learning. And I have people who were reporting to me that I made sure was smarter than me. Any good CISO better do that. And so I would be learning from that. Now I'm on my own. And I've got to somehow keep up with everything that's happening just as a person in the field.
Yeah, I think a lot of CISOs try to figure out like where they're going to go after the C life of the CISO, right? A lot of people, as they're coming up, they think, you know, the CISO pinnacle of the trade, pinnacle of the industry, like I'm going to be a CISO and that's it. And then you get there and you realize, oh, there's life after being a CISO. But that's really true. I found that, you know, once you're not, you know, 100% operator role, it does take more practice and effort to make sure you're staying abreast of what's going on in the industry. Otherwise, you know, you become somewhat stale. But it's that balance between, I think, trying to figure out how to balance a lot of non-traditional roles.
Absolutely. And I hope that every CISO out there listening is thinking about what you're going to do when you're finished being a CISO. Because, you know, you can't do this your whole career. You know, it'll burn you out.
Yeah, you'll go crazy.
or that, something. So yeah, think about what makes you want to wake up each morning, what makes you happy, what things you do, which is indirectly what you were asking me. You know, I like doing what I'm doing right now. I'm very happy, and I don't have someone who I have to report to, which was just, on the hierarchical chart where they thought security might fit, but really didn't. That old topic again.
Less frustration, maybe kind of a different kind of frustration, right? I'm sure there's different things you're frustrated with now, but it's certainly nice not having that, man, I'm fighting for a budget and I'm not getting what I want. Nobody's really listening to me. It's kind of a little bit of a release once you're past that on the CISO side.
Yeah, and I'm interacting with a lot of people now because I got my hands in a lot of different types of things.
Sure.
And it's really nice. I think our field's kind of unique. You get a lot of people of high ethical standards. Not everybody, but there seems
We'll
to be
get into
a
ethics.
higher amount than in some other fields, let's say.
Sure.
And all walks of life, different people. I'm getting to know people a little bit more because I have the time, and it's part of what I do now, to getting to know people. And people that I've known for many years, I'm building more relationship now and going, hey, we got to know what we like, what our hobbies are, different things about each other, and that's always a really good thing.
Yeah, that's good. So let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about ISSA because you're president of ISSA-LA chapter. So that's the International Sports Sciences Association, right? Yeah. That comes up first on a Google search, but Information System Security Association. So can you talk a little bit about? I mean, I'm sure most viewers are familiar with it, but some people might not be. So a little bit about kind of ISSA, the mission, and what's the future look like for ISSA?
In the early 80s, two women had the guts and the foresight to form ISSA-LA. Okay. No, not LA, ISSA. And it started in LA, which was great. And little by little, it started spreading around the country, and it's now an international association of information security professionals. And the goal is quite simple, to push forth cybersecurity into every company, to educate the cybersecurity professionals, to have a forum where an exchange of ideas can happen on a regular basis. Chapters around the world can have meetings, can have speakers, can have trainings, just to overall spread the field and enhance it and give people in the field hope that they're not alone, that they have people and a way to collaborate, because the cyber criminals certainly are doing that. And so we have
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think anyone in cyber can realize that we need to talk more. There needs to be more openness, more transparency. I think for a long time it's been kind of a we're a closed group natively, right? Because it's about security. We believe in privacy and those kind of things. But part of that is trying to figure out, I think, between companies, how to have more open conversations about the issues that we all face and the solutions, and how to improve those.
Absolutely. It's also a really good place for the next generation to meet, cybersecurity professionals that they can look up to, they can learn from. Mentorships are very important. And, where else so I got an email today from someone who's new to the field and was asking for, what can I do to, get into the field and to learn more? And I said, come to the ISSA meetings. We have them every month. And depending on where people live, there's usually one that's drivable, maybe a couple of hours, right? Depending on the time of day as well.
Yeah, and location, yeah.
Particularly out here. But it's really important. Both of us, we're not young, we like to, stay active. And
I like to try to forget that fact, but yes, right. I think, we're men of a certain age at this point.
But look what we're doing here today. We're still active in the field, right? But it's important also to recognize that there's got to be a whole nother generation that's going to come up and enhance the values that we believe in and support the industry. And there has to be a way for us all to communicate, not just LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever you want to use. There's got to be in person, because there's nothing like in person.
Yeah, it builds a community, I think, more, certainly quickly, more quickly. But I think there's that need to be in person and have engagement, kind of build those relationships that are, look, we can still build relationships remotely. I think we saw that during COVID. But I think there's a different level of relationship you typically build when you're face-to-face.
We're social creatures.
Yeah.
This is who we are as a species, right? And, Zoom's great. It's got its place. But, I'm enjoying just sitting here with you. But for those of you out there, come look me up when you're in LA. right?
Yeah, have
And we
that
can
personal
meet in person.
conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, if I think about ISSA, and then there's other organizations on the security side. There's, ISACA, there's different, local community groups that people participate in, and they all have their particular mission statements, goals, and what they do. But one of the things that I've found lacking is really a CISO organization, right? Something, and there are a couple things. There's some things on LinkedIn. There's some things that I'm a participant with, but really kind of elevating it to that next level. And I lean into issues that we've had in the CISO community, things like the Joe Sullivan case at Uber, Tim Brown over at SolarWinds, the change in SEC regulations and guidance, and I think there'll be more investor lawsuits potentially around companies. And so I'm really wondering, and I want to get your thoughts on this, what do you think about the need for almost the elevation of CISOs into professional organization, professional society, similar to, the bar, right? Or, being a CPA, right?
Yeah.
Having that backing of an organization and the requirements of having a certain level of, education and experience to actually be a CISO. We'll talk maybe a little bit about the Wyden report saying, in the Change Healthcare incident that they had a CISO that really maybe shouldn't have been in that role. And I don't know the specifics of it. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't. I'm just, commenting on that Wyden report. But I think it highlights a gap. Thoughts?
Well, ISSA does have their executive forum, which used to be called the CISO forum, which is basically they meet quarterly in different cities around the country. They have speakers. It's an all-day event, and they start the evening before with a dinner. It's something that I would recommend. I mean, I did it for many years, and I made a lot of contacts, I made friends, and it was very helpful for me, right? Again, the speakers are great. The trainings that can result are great, but there's nothing like the networking. That's where you make your connections. That's where you find the people that you can bounce ideas off, that you can talk to them in confidence about an issue you're having, and maybe they've experienced it. Maybe they know a good solution. Maybe they'll share with you templates or different things. I've had that happen to me. It's helped. I've shared mine with other people as well. So that's one thing. The other thing is, shameful plug, the Planet CyberSec CISO forums that I put on around California are great places. And we did have Joe Sullivan. You mentioned him. He spoke and gave his side of things. Fascinating to hear things that were not in the media, that were not in the industry, to hear how he presented himself. And so it's important to have these venues where you're getting to hear people firsthand. And I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting a replacement for any of those things on the level that they are, right? I think those are all collaboration. It's camaraderie. It's finding out how people are doing things. But I'm thinking more of professional code of conduct, professional code of ethics, right? When I look at where CISOs are today, I think a lot of CISOs struggle to feel like they're part of the inner circle of the CEO, right? That they have a seat at the table.
Yes.
And so part of that is, having a body that can come out and say, these are the industry norms around being a CISO. This is what we see as, you've got to have these certain things, this level of responsibility, but here are also the things that you have to be imbued with by the company and the organization, a certain set of principles, and then, recommendations. You should have D&O insurance. You should have liability coverage. When should you seek counsel? A recommendation of individual counsel that you may want to retain, like all these things that I think we're missing right now as professionals. And it really, a lot of CISOs want to be elevated up, but I don't think we've done a good job of setting the bar for where we need to be elevated to.
Yeah, I think that successful CISOs understand that it's all about the business. It's about risk and the business. And many CISOs have cut their teeth and come up through the ranks of IT or IT security. And that is still in their DNA, in their blood, and they're not realizing they've got to take that leap and become the business leader. And to be a business leader, you've got to understand all these things that we did not learn in school necessarily, unless some people get a master's. I have a business degree, so I learned that at a very young age. But to have an organization that would provide all of this knowledge and commonality would really be a good idea. So I do like that. I haven't heard that conversation much, really, other than in practice, you have to do these things to be successful.
But you heard it here first. I'm trying to advocate and push for that, right? I'm a big believer in the CISO is a business leader. He should be thought of that way.
Or she.
Yes. Or she needs to think about herself that way. I don't think sometimes we do a good job of thinking about ourselves that way, and people don't know what they're lacking. And the business isn't doing a good job either of taking us on as, kind of a mentee and saying, hey, here's what you need to do. Let me pair you with, this business leader, the
Right.
CFO, the chief of legal, and, work with them and try to get more imbued with the business side of what security needs to do and be more aware of the business. I think we've done a really poor job of that.
Yeah, and still today, you would think that, this topic's been around for quite a bit. You would think by now that a good CISO would understand that they can't go into that rare board meeting that they might have the privilege of attending and start talking about the number of attacks or numbers. This stuff will not resonate, and if they're going to continue to talk that way, they'll see they won't get invites any longer.
Yeah, statistics are bad.
Yeah.
You need them sometimes, right? But overall, I think we go in with too much technical jargon and statistical information when the board's looking for a business level conversation and understanding about, at the end of the day, we're trying to sell X, we're trying to move X, right? And as a result, how does security help us do that? How does proper risk balance help us do that?
Yeah, you mentioned the magic word there, risk, right?
It's what it all comes down
So
to.
we
right?
have to totally. We're
We're risk leaders.
absolutely.
Yeah,
That's all we are.
And so, we maybe touched on this here in this discussion. What about the board's participation and the level of education that you're seeing boards generally have, or conversation with? You talk to a lot of CISOs. When you see those CISOs and you talk to them, are you hearing complaints about the level of board education and awareness?
You're always going to hear that.
Yeah.
And we can't expect the board to do our job or to be fellow cybersecurity leaders, right? They have their role, just like we can't expect the users to be cybersecurity professionals, right? That's our role, right? To do that.
But
to
do
take
you
the
look
lead
for
on them.
do you look for additional, let's say additional membership on the board to grow and to have some of that technical expertise? It's not that long ago before SOX when you didn't have to have financial expertise on the
Right.
board necessarily, right? If you didn't have somebody on the board who could read a balance sheet, well, yeah, that was okay. That's not
I would love
reality
this.
anymore.
Obviously, that's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
loaded
yeah.
question. I would love this. And the SEC had their chance, almost did it.
Yeah, a little bit
backed
of a
away.
miss.
Yeah, maybe down the road, right? That might happen, but and there's just so much time that we would have to educate the board. That's just rare. We might have a few minutes as part of our meeting because we have other things to talk about. Would I love it? Yes. Would I like to see it institutionalized? Yes. And codified? Yes. And that might still happen. But, a company has to understand, every company now has to, one of the most precious things is their infrastructure, their data, their information, right?
Well, every company's a digital company now,
Absolutely.
right?
Right. And so with that recognition comes the fact that, hey, we better protect this. This is the essence of who we are. And who better to help protect it than our security leader, whatever title you want to give them.
Sure.
And due diligence means listening to that person and evaluating it and plugging that into their risk equation and not just brushing it off and saying, let IT worry about the security guy.
Yeah, I think we're going to see, I'm hoping that we're going to see more acceptance of that and pushing to have that happen. And I think one of the reasons actually we're going to probably see that is I'm expecting more investor lawsuits as a result of, companies that make bad decisions on this, right?
Yeah, there's some high profile things. You mentioned one of them with poor Joe. And then there's going to be more. And
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if something came out of Change. I think I might have heard that there might be something about CDK Global that's already, potentially in the work. So, it's concerning where we are right now.
yeah, and with the Supreme Court ruling, there's probably going to be a lot more lawsuits, I mean, it's a boom for lawyers and from all types, right? Anything that's related to regulation and government. And so I think you're absolutely right.
So since you brought that up, that was actually on my list to talk about. Is for those of you who aren't aware, there was a recent Supreme Court ruling that basically eliminated Chevron deference, right? And so I think that there's been a lot of question about what the impacts are.
Yes.
I actually think that's going to be huge for the cyber industry. I think that regulation is woefully behind here.
It always will be,
if
though.
not just lacking.
Yeah.
But the technical aspect of it, it's always going to be lagging behind. So how do you see that ruling actually impacting kind of CISOs and the cyber world? I do think that there's going to be a lot of rollbacks. Even the recent SEC rulings and guidance on 4-day windows to report. Is that all going to come undone because there's not law?
That's the fear. That's the fear. A lot of the good work that CISA has put forth in the last 4 or 5 years, some of the things that the Biden administration has put forth, a lot of that is in jeopardy. And that directly affects what we do and how effective we can be and how companies are protected and the data and how clients and customers' data is protected. I'm always an optimist. and you brought up the thing that I could try to be optimistic about, which is maybe this will inspire Congress and the Senate to act. But I'm not that optimistic.
You're really optimistic.
I'm not that optimistic. So I look at what happened as a negative, and I'm waiting for someone to show me how that can be positive. If there was to be legislation, that would be great, but I don't know if that's a high priority for them.
I think that there's a lot of areas where I do see positivity in Chevron, but I see from cyber specifically, I see that as going to be really challenging. I don't see a lot of positivity in the cyber realm specifically with the result of that. I think there's questions I've heard a lot of people. Does the SEC even have anything to do with cyber legally? And so can they make any rulings as a result of that? Certainly CISA, Jenny Easterly is doing a great job over there. I think there's questions of how much CISA can actually do with lack of actual physical laws supporting the regulation. So that's concerning for me. I really see the Chevron ruling as being, I think, more impactful than people have really thought about.
I've only seen a few articles on this, and I'm glad that you brought it up. I think I brought it up. But
you mentioned it was on my list, though. It was on my list.
Good. So I'm happy because I'm very concerned about that.
Yeah.
When I read this, I went, oh, my goodness, because I hadn't thought about it initially when I first read about the ruling.
Unintended consequences, right?
Yes, and the world's filled with that.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a good point, and maybe I glossed over it a bit. Was that there's really I think a low likelihood of good regulation coming out.
Yeah.
I see Congress is being woefully uneducated in this space. We talked about boards being uneducated. I think Congress is probably less educated. Luckily, there are a couple people in Congress that have some experience. But generally, this is not an area that's been well legislated, and I don't expect it to be in the short term.
Yeah.
And given the current just climate in the country, I think having an expectation that'll change anytime soon is probably unlikely.
No, I wouldn't count on it. But it puts even more pressure on
CISOs,
on practitioners in the cyberspace.
I think it's going to be hard for practitioners to push back against boards that are making poor risk decisions on this, right? Because they're, I've been in organizations where I've gone in and they said, hey, we're highly regulated. And you actually walk in and they're not highly regulated. They're highly regulated for other things, but not for cyber, not for SOX, PCI, HIPAA, GLBA, those kind of things that actually have a cyber impact. And so when those regulations are taken away, or you work in an industry that's not highly regulated, sometimes it's really hard to get initiatives pushed forward because you don't have that backing.
Absolutely, yeah. One thing I'll say, I think we've heard the mantra that compliance isn't security, right? But I have to admit, compliance helps get you the budget.
It does.
And then you take that, and then you can implement real security.
Well, yeah. So when you said that, I was thinking, the smart CISOs that I know, and I like to, count myself in that number, when we think about how we're going to utilize compliance to do that, we'll push the mandate that, hey, we need to do this for compliance. When you get the budget, then you think, okay, now how am I going to spend this wisely to do all the things that I need to do that I know are really protecting the company, and I'm meeting the compliance guidelines at the same time, right? But you extend it further.
Any good security program will meet compliance with whatever regulation you want to
Because if you're doing security well, for the most part, you're going to cover off compliance,
Absolutely.
right? Like there may be a couple things that you would, back in the day, file integrity management, right? I had somebody come to me and sometimes like, why are we investing in this? And my answer was, well, based upon what we're doing, it's not helping us, but we have to do it for a compliance reason, right? Yeah. So there are some things, and it all depends upon industry and in your specifics of your organization. But I think generally, if you run the program well, you're going to cover off compliance.
I mean, we mapped, now there are companies that'll do this for you, but back then we did an Excel spreadsheet.
Control mapping, yeah.
And we did a mapping of NIST and high trust and HIPAA and ISO, and we put it all together. And basically, we didn't change what we were doing. We did the same thing. It's just the output of the report was mapped to these different templates.
Yeah, aligned differently, yeah.
And so...
And you find and where I was referencing, you'll find the outlier or two where it only maps to one thing, and you're like, okay, we've got to figure out how to do this right.
But it's all just language, right?
Yeah.
And that's it. So, come up with a good security program, do it the right way, and there's a lot of guides for that. And don't compromise on that. Make that what your goal is. You're never going to be able to implement everything in your security program the way you want, because of finances, right? And conflicts.
And that's okay. Like I think a lot of people think, well, we should spend more money on this. But there is a balance between, that's the business side, right? That's like really looking at your security program as a business leader and saying, we could do it better, but the risk reward ratio isn't there. And so we're going to put money back in the rest of the business because we can. But sometimes the business has to do the same thing and say we need to invest in the security side as well.
Always be conscious. A huge part of what you do is compensating controls.
It is.
Right? And that's just going to always be the way, and that's what you're on the lookout for. And that's part of a stream of consciousness as we move forward. To always see, well, what are the things that we can do until we can do it the way I really want to do it, right? But there's always a way.
So when you think about compensating controls, you're balancing against risk, you're balancing against threats. What do you see right now? What's concern for you? What's concern for peers that you're talking to about the largest risks the largest threats that we're facing in the current environment?
Okay. Clearly, ransomware is, up there. It's got to be, right? It's a fear. The phishing that happens, that's ransomware is one of the best ways that to get into an organization. It's very difficult to stop. So you have to have these other controls in place to minimize the impact, right? We've heard how many times it's not a question of if or when you'll be breached, but even further than that, they're probably in now and you don't know about it. And so with all of that said, you've got to compartmentalize, you've got to have monitoring in place, and you have to be able to react quickly. And part of the way to react quickly is to have a great incident response team already in place that you've practiced, that you've tested, and that you've done your due diligence to make sure everyone knows their role and what to do, so you can immediately react when you see, hey, why do I see data going to China? Is that something I should be looking at? Let's shut that down.
And how are you going to respond? I like to think that when you're practicing on a response and recovery plan, you've got to go kind of end to end on it. And I see a lot of security practitioners stop. They start with the event. They look at, okay, what's the monitoring? How are we assessing it? Okay, we've identified it. Well, that's where they stop, right? As opposed to going to, okay, how are we involving external counsel, right? How are we involving external PR? What are we going to say publicly in this event that this happens? Looking at all the external parties and the rest of the C team in your own company that you've got to involve. Have you talked to finance? Have you talked to marketing? Have you talked to, how are you going to message to your customers? How is sales going to handle this, right? Like there's a whole ecosystem of partners that you have to play with to make sure that you're addressing this. And I think a lot of people don't go far enough. We hear a lot of times on the recovery side, like, well, I've got backups. Have you tested that? Have you actually done a full recovery? Have you called the tapes back and actually seen how long it'll take you to recover that data?
Right. That's. I'm glad you pointed that out. I've spoken about that, and the bottom line is there have been companies that almost went under because they said, "Well, we've got everything in place." And when I asked them, "Did you ever do an actual test on how long it will take to find, with the amount of data that everyone has now, and to find out it took a week?" When they said, well, I didn't know. And imagine a company not being able to do their work for a week.
I know of a company that looked at an actual incident and went to get the data and they couldn't find the tapes.
Well, that's a whole nother
right? I mean, like, if you can't even keep track of the tape. Yeah. So it's a bigger problem than people think. And it's the holistic plan that you have to test to make sure that you
And then the other point that you mentioned about incident response, it's not an IT, it's not a security, it's a team, it's a company-wide issue, and you've got to have representation from PR, legal, right?
And one of the things that people don't think about is in these events where you're actually going through the test and you've now involved the rest of the company, the other thing you're doing is you're making a case for your budget. Because the rest of the company, the head of sales is seeing, oh, I see how this is going to be impactful to our customers.
There's your education.
Right? That's the connection you need to make. That's when you're assessing and trying to make people understand that you really are part of the business and a business leader, talk to them in business terms, right? Make the connection for them so they see, I understand why you're making that ask.
Absolutely. It's key. A good leader in security has got to be a business person, but they have to establish relationships. That's the key, right? They've got to befriend the head of all the business units, or at least try, and they've got to perhaps get them to because it's addressing each one of the needs for each of the business units from a perspective of security, trying to inject security in at early stages. One of the things that I did was I connected with the head of project management, right? And said, okay, anytime you have a proposal that's coming to you to be a project, because a company better have this, right?
Yeah.
And they have a list of questions, what are the requirements? What are you trying to achieve? I said, okay, I want to ask them things such as, is this application that you're looking to bring in, is this going to be internet facing? Is this going to be local? Is it going to be hosted here? Is it going to be in the cloud? Is it going to house PII? Is it going to house anything else? I want to know the answers to these. And based on the responses, I start building a risk profile, and I can then get an evaluation of what we have to be careful about, what we have to do if this project's going to get forward. But I have to know this
ahead
in
of time,
phase zero, when this is first a concept and not a full-blown proposal.
You have to be part of the whole life cycle, cradle to grave.
Right. And so that's what you got to reach out and understand, and not just wait for a company to tell you, we have this app, we're ready to
push the prod?
Yeah, just do a security evaluation. How many days do you need for this? And I was like, what? Yeah. That's like 10 years ago, but some companies are still
doing
that
it.
model. Yeah. And that's a recipe for disaster.
So you mentioned in the response there, you mentioned the human side of stuff, and I know that's important to you. And when I think about the human factor with regards to security, how critical is that human factor to security to you? Like, where does that, where does it place? I like to think, there's three parts of it. There's the people factor, the technology, and the process side. And I have a specific orientation that I place those in. But what's that like for you?
I believe a good leader has to be an expert in soft skills, bottom line. And I'd say that's 50% of the role.
Sure.
Right? And there's three things, but I think soft skills, leadership, and business acumen, and just being a person, because you don't just have to interact with these leaders that I mentioned before. You've got a staff you've got to manage.
Yeah.
Right? You've got to inspire. You have to enable people to be their best, to make them feel that they should take that step and be uncomfortable, that they should not be afraid to fail, that they should be creative, that they should push their envelope. You've got to support them, and you've got to fight back with corporate culture if they don't embrace that. Because there are some corporations that still follow the old model. You fail, you're out of here, right? But you want your team.
Yeah, so talk about that, because that was where I was kind of going next was culture side of it. Like, how important is the culture of security within a company to the success or failure of a security program?
So different companies have different cultures. Security is plugged in different ways. But the role of a good security leader is to understand the perception of how a company looks at things, whether they're very welcoming and very strict by the book. But you can be successful in any of those companies, but you better learn the culture and understand how you plug security in, how you educate people, and how you interact, right? Some companies are much more open and welcoming to hear you.
Any thoughts if you go into a company? A lot of CISOs changing roles, and one of the things they get into is they interviewed, they had a certain perception, they get into the company and they realize, oh, the culture here isn't security first.
Well, it's never going to be security first.
But it could be, right? Like, there are companies that really think about, they take security seriously and they build it into the overall concept, right? I think about my time at Visa when I was at Visa.
Financial,
Visa considers itself more of a technology, but yes, it's a fine line between finance and tech. But when I think about that, it was transmitting data securely, right? Like, that was built into kind of the core concept of what they did. A lot of companies can do that, and it doesn't take a lot of effort or value to make that change. But a lot of companies don't. A lot of companies think about it as a secondary action, and it's much more expensive for them, right? So what advice would you give to somebody who gets in and they find the culture is, not unchangeable, because there are those companies too, but a company where it's just they haven't thought about it that way and they need to pivot. Maybe it's not security first, but it's certainly security is a part of our DNA. We need to do that. How do you get a company to move that way if they're not already there?
Okay. You need an audience. You need time to speak to people. And part of that can be something as simple as reaching out to division heads in other business units, finding out who are the key players that have been, every company has these people that have been there 20 years, and they have the ear of the decision makers. And it's not on the hierarchical chart.
Yeah, they're just in the circle.
The glue, right? You've heard this term. Reach out, find out, ask questions. Like, who's been around a while? What's their role? And you will find out by these interviews, oh, yeah, like Larry and Bob, man, they know everything. And they're friends with the CFO because they grew up together or something, right? And then it's like, okay, now that might be my back door to be heard, to be, understood. And just dig into your pocket, take them to lunch, okay? I always say this, and I've said this for years. I've done it, and it's
spend some personal capital to get a little political capital.
Yes, but it's a seemingly inconsequential thing that has huge dividends. We're human beings, and we remember who's done something nice for us, even something little like a lunch, right? They'll remember that, and so the next time they have to make a choice. Well, we only have time for this, and we have, which one should we choose? Oh, let's take Richard,
That's the personal relationship that we talked about earlier, right?
Yeah, little things.
So when we think about culture and we think about security and how security integrates with the rest of the company, I think a lot of times security has been perceived in the past as the no, right? That we're not going to do this, right? But a lot of the reasons why we do that is because of regulations or controls. We have privacy to deal with. So when we think about privacy within an organization, there's a lot of response that we have an ethical obligation to protect people's privacy. But do you see instances where security might overstep that ethical boundary and, cause problems within the organization as a result of that? Or ethics, should we always hold high to the ethical standards that we have?
We've got to be able to live with ourselves, right? You don't want to compromise your ethics, your who you are as a person, what you believe in, right? And so if you're being asked to do something at work, and many are. Let's face it, where we work, companies, there's a field of ex-CISOs, the field strewn with them, who either were booted for not compromising their principles or have compromised and then had to quit at some point because they just couldn't live with what they did, right? So wake up each morning, look in the mirror and say, yeah, and if you got to find a new job, hell, that's what you're going to have to do. Now, there's that pyramid effect, right? The higher you go with the more responsibility, the less opportunities, less jobs are out there. So some people are very reluctant to stick to their principles. I understand that. Some people have families. Maybe they bought the big house based on the big job that they got. And now it's like, well, how do I know? Every CISO pretty much that I've met over the years has had a period of time, sometimes even a full year, where they're out of work, right? But they're doing some consulting in the meantime. And then they eventually land another opportunity. And I always look at every opportunity as an opportunity, a good one. So, yeah, easy for me to say, pontificating, sitting here, hey, stick to your principles, don't. But, you're going to have to live with yourselves. This is a choice that you're going to have to make in our field. And then these choices will probably happen to almost everyone.
So one of the things I think we're dealing with, and I've been trying to stay away from the AI conversation, but I'm gonna
what?
AI? Yeah,
I've
you
heard
may
of
have
that.
heard of it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna weave it in a little bit to the ethics thing here, and I think one of the things that we're seeing with AI is, and it intersects with ethics, is monitoring, right? And so as we look at enhanced security, there was a time when it was hard to collect as much data as we wanted to, right? Storage costs, just the ability, the load that it put on stuff. But we're seeing a lot more ability to collect a lot more data now, right? And a lot of companies are leaning into this because they're saying, okay, look, in order to be secure, I've got to collect as much data as I can. Do you see an intersection of an ethics problem in employee monitoring, collecting of data? Like, where does that line get drawn where we're intruding on someone's privacy versus, no, we're just protecting the business? Like, how do you come out on that?
Good question. So there's a whole area of ethics in AI that is really important. There's this inherent bias in a lot of the AI tools that have ethical issues. And that
I feel like I'm leading the witness because bias was in AI was where that was going. So dive in.
Yeah, because there's been documented cases where facial recognition using AI, for example, misidentified someone. It wasn't tested enough with minority members, right? That's just one example, and there are other ethical considerations on the larger scope, which we've been warned about by different people. Where's AI going, right? Is AI going to start making decisions for us? Are those decisions considering all the things that we as human beings consider? Or is it just a numbers game, which, as we all know, we're complicated individuals. We're made up of lots of things that make us unique as a species. And part of that is, you can call it intuition, a feeling, an understanding of under the surface of what the tensions and interactions are where you are with the people that you're interacting with. And can AI do that? Right now, no, not until it becomes sentient, if it ever can. That's a whole nother conversation. But these are important issues, and AI has its value. I think it's a wonderful tool, and I think that everybody should be embracing AI, both personally and professionally, because it's a huge time saver. It allows you to focus on the things you want rather than busy work. And we all have to do the busy work.
So you're a believer in the positive. So AI as the savior, not as the terminator.
Not as a savior, but let's be real. Look at the different things throughout the history of humanity, right? We've got the printing press, the steam revolution, the industrial revolution, the computers, internet, and now AI. And possibly AI could be more important than any of those by the time we're done, looking back 5 years from now. Remember this conversation. And because what it can do-
as the killer drones start flying through the streets, I will remember this conversation.
it could be Skynet, or it could be a wonderful new world for all of us. I don't know. There's been people who are very concerned about the jobs that will be replaced, and certainly that's going to happen. But the new jobs will be created as a result too. You're going to need people always to manage this whole process.
You'll need influencers.
They have a new term. They have a new term which is I forgot the term, but basically the ones that
Prompt engineers.
Yes, thank you. You knew where I was going. So and it's six figures.
Yeah.
Some of these positions. So it's kind of like, okay, well, if that's happening, maybe there's others. So just like we had when mass production started, you lost a lot of factory jobs and it was taken over by automation, but people found other things, and then the whole travel industry and that started to get affected by internet. But people move on, and there's all different fields, right? And different opportunities. People have to be willing to relearn, what they do and how. And that's always a challenge. People get comfortable, but they're going to have to learn new ways, right?
Well, I think we're not going to have any other option, right? It's just, we're going to have to figure it out.
Yeah.
So, when we think AI, I'm going to try to make this segue, and we'll see if it works.
Okay.
When we think of AI, LLMs, learning, large language models, and the learning capability of AI, I think one of the things that, if it's done right, it could be very successful, is the potential for AI to learn from mistakes. What about humans learning from mistakes, right? Learning from failure. Like, any thought on how, things that are security failures can ultimately lead to epiphanies or insights, and what's your thoughts on learning from failure in the security industry? I think we've had a little bit of discussion on this outside of the conversation here, and I know that that's maybe something that you have some passion about. So I want to talk about that, because I think that's really interesting. I love the whole concept of learning from failure.
You will learn more from failure than you will from success. And that's just the way it is. You'll remember it more because it was painful, but you'll take from it things that you can do to be better and to move forward more positively. It's not just about security. It's about everything in life.
Agreed.
Right? We should all be willing to take those chances, to be more creative, to find a better way. What's one of the worst expressions that you've ever heard? Is it, well, that's the way we've always done it, right? Oh, I hated that. I got into so many issues. I mean, I was in government, so that was the mantra for a lot of people there. And I was always trying to find out, well, so what?
Yeah.
Let's try this. But what if that doesn't work? Well, then we'll learn and we'll move forward and do it another way. So it's been in my history for my whole career, where I was trying to push. And sometimes people got uncomfortable with it. But ultimately, we went forward and found better ways to do things.
So how can a CISO foster that in their security teams, right? Because I think I'm always a big believer in kind of trying to do it in your own team before you try to take it out to the rest of the company. Any kind of examples of how we can foster that kind of culture?
If there's a goal that you're setting, right? You make it clear. I don't care how we get to that goal, legally, of course. How do we get there? I want you to think of other ways to get there other than just the way we've been doing it, right? Come up with some other way to do it. I don't remember the details of this, but a long time ago when I was an IT director, I was learning NT, and there was some way where Microsoft said, oh, you can do this, this, and this, and I switched it around and applied it in a different way, and it worked, and I was like, wow, I hadn't thought of that, and I hadn't been taught that. It was just thinking outside the box, and that's the thing that you've got to, impart to your team. It's like, as opposed to me judging you by never failing, I'm going to judge you by whether you've tried to do something different, tried to be creative.
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of leaders come in with this culture of like, we can't afford to fail on this. It's too important to fail. And like, I think, you've got to give people, instead of the big goal to get to, give them the small wins.
Yep.
And take away those things of, okay, we failed in this way, but we learned something. As long as you come away with the learning, you can articulate it and then apply that learning to, the next task. As long as somebody's learning something out of it, it's okay. Like giving permission to the team. And I think setting expectations with your leadership, right? And saying, look, everything is not going to work the first time out. Like we're going to have to take some calculated risks on that, and understanding what that risk threshold is. Again, understanding how risk works, and risk is a process. Explaining that to your leadership, explaining that to your team, I think you'll see a lot bigger wins in the long run.
Be a strong supporter of your team, right? If some decision maker somewhere in the organization, got upset with something that one of your team did, but your team had the right approach, the right attitude, and was trying to help, then you have to really defend them.
Yeah, it will be a
leader.
leader for them. Be a leader, right?
Absolutely.
Like, don't say, "Hey, Bob failed on this." Say, "Hey, like we had a miss. We're gonna rework this, and we'll win." And then go have that conversation with Bob. Hey, what did you learn? But don't throw them under the bus for it. I think I've seen people do that, and that's a mistake. You will lose a team faster than
worst
anything.
thing you could possibly do. A couple of things that I've done. I've had, and not everyone is comfortable with this, but I have had some of my team do a presentation
On the failure, yeah.
On the failure. That's a tough one, right? And I had to help them, and sometimes I would jump in during their presentation when you could just see that they were uncomfortable because they were touching on the failure.
But that's the point of the post-mortem, right? I mean, when we have an incident, and we run through our process and we do our recovery, but one of the things I've always done after that is that we do a post-mortem, and we're very critical about the post-mortem, and nobody gets blamed for the post-mortem, right? Like, okay, we had a failure, like that's obvious. Like, what are we going to learn from it? How are we going to fix it? And I think that's that same thing.
Right.
Do post-mortem on other types of events, right? And having somebody report what you're doing is you're imbuing this culture of it's okay to fail as long as you're learning something and moving it forward, and we're not continuing the failure.
Right. And another part of that, you're helping build new leaders. You're helping people feel better about themselves. We know that on IT, it's filled with introverts. That's just the way. Security too. A lot of people. Right? Obviously, you and I are not. But if you think about the field, right? And so I was challenged, but I accepted that challenge, and I helped mentor my team to give presentations. And you could see some of them were really nervous, and I would help them with it, right? But that's another area where I'm encouraging you, don't be afraid to fail. This is a safe environment right here. This is our team. Everyone's supportive. And people got applause when they finished their talk, and they felt, wow, I did this. I spoke in front of people I've never had before, right? And I also, to be fair, on the other side, I had people present when they were successful as well.
I mean, look, you want to celebrate the wins and the successes, but I think it's important to call out the balance in both, right? If you always say, hey, we're just going to celebrate the wins, then like you're winning all the time. I think it's important to highlight there's a balance to everything, and like we learn from both sides of that equation.
Yeah, you never should remember how you felt when you were down low on the totem pole and had to work your way up, and how you felt, and what you wished your leader would be.
Yeah,
that's the leader I want to be.
Yeah, I like that. And what we're leaning into right now is some of the psychology about cyber, and just business in general. I'm actually a big believer in leaning more into the human capital and psychological side of this, because I think one of the things that we focused on in security in general, we talk a lot about it cyber, but I think security is bigger than that, and risk, is there's a lot of psychology behind this. Yes. Even in risk decision making, there's inherent bias there. There's trust issues. There is a psychology behind this that I think if we don't understand that there's a psychological impact, we'll never deal with it the best way we could. And so when you think about psychology and how that impacts the organization, the psychology of reporting cyber incidents, right? Like that's a big thing, because I think sometimes things don't get reported because there's this perception of, I don't want to be seen as the person that did something wrong or the person that missed something. So thoughts on that? Like, what do we need to do better on how we treat the human capital side from a psychology with reporting and safety?
I'll relay some personal experiences that I had, and I would be willing to bet that several of you folks listening or watching experienced the same thing. A lot of resistance by the people who were the head of IT when I was trying to do risk assessments and point out things that they need to improve. They did not want us to see their problems. They said, "You're airing our dirty laundry," and my response was, "Better that you and I figure this out than someone on the outside breaking in because they compromised a system or something based on this vulnerability that we had. Let's find out now." And so you have to figure out a way of passing along that information in a positive way to this person who's feeling that they're being scrutinized, that they're under the microscope, that their boss and upper management will look at them going, "Why didn't you fix this? Why didn't you do that? Why did security find this?" So that's an important aspect where you've got to really be psychologically aware of what your impact. Too many security leaders will say, "That's my job, and you're supposed to be patching 100%." As an example, right? So that's something that's really important. You have to understand their perspective, and you can't just say, "Well, they should feel secure enough in what they do." No, we're human beings with frailties, and maybe upper management has been tough on them in another job, and they're afraid of letting people see. And I've encountered this several times, not just once or twice, and again, many of you probably have as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have kind of a fear of retribution, of somebody coming after them, of, they've reported something, but they're ultimately going to be held responsible. When ultimately, as security professionals, really what we just want to know is where the problems are and how are we going to work together to fix them. And I think that's one of the culture things. Like, we're all in this together. We've got to build that security first culture.
Well, that's the trick, right? And you can't, you're not going to get folks to be holding hands, singing Kumbaya. You just want them to be on the same team. Right?
Yeah, I would agree. So, when we think about all this and kind of threats and concerns and the human capital and psychology side, one of the things that I'm often concerned about is, obviously because of the industry that I particularly work in now, is the psychology around ransomware and why it's so effective, right? We've seen a lot of attacks recently. We've seen Change Healthcare. We've seen CDK. Going back to Colonial Pipeline, those are kind of the big ones. But I think almost every security professional has some personal experience with the ransomware issue or incident, whether they personally had it or a very close colleague had an issue or incident. So why do you think we're seeing this kind of rise in ransomware as a risk to corporate America? Why is this the thing that we're concerned about, and why hasn't it been fixed?
It's too easy for the criminals to do this, right? And there are targeted attacks. Let's not.
Sure.
But there's plenty of these automated attacks. They throw it out there and see what sticks. And there's too many companies that aren't doing all the things that we've talked about here today. Good security program, some of the basic things. And I mentioned patching again.
Yeah, hygiene, right?
Yeah. If they had done it, so many of the well-known attacks in ransomware took advantage of a well-known vulnerability where the patch and the fix was out there for 5 years.
Yeah, and the strange thing is the investment that a company would have needed to make is really small compared to what the eventual impact is, right?
Absolutely.
It's a strange psychological problem that we haven't figured out to do the right thing from a hygiene side on the front side.
No, I was very active in OWASP for years. I was on the international board for a while and led the LA chapter of OWASP. And it just blows my mind. SQL injection is still one of the more frequent things that you're seeing perpetrators taking advantage of. And the fix has been out there for forever, 10 years at least. And it's still a vulnerability. Why? This is the thing.
So, when in the ransomware game, when we see this and we see the level that it's come to, we talked about this on the other podcast earlier. the kind of juxtaposition and the crossover from an annoyance to criminal activity to warfare. Like where's the line for this? Because it's all over the map, and we seem to just be treating this really as an annoyance at a nation level, right? Like we're not really handling it very well.
Well, okay, so it's a very complicated issue. There has been deaths that can be attributed to ransomware.
Complication is okay. We're getting serious about security now, right?
Well, when I say complication, what I'm saying is that the government's well aware of everything that you're saying today, and the government can't act with impunity, and it has to understand repercussions of anything it might do. And for example, attacking Russia probably would not be a good idea because of...
Yeah, and it's always hard the attribution is hard, right? So even if we know that the actor's a Russian actor, even if we... I'm saying, like, let's just assume an incident where we say that we know the actor. Pick a country, right?
Sure.
Where Russia, China, India, France, or the UK,
Iran.
for that matter, right? It doesn't matter. So we know that they're a citizen of that country. We know that they're getting some type of either looking the other way or shielding from the nation state. What still do you do? I mean, we don't have jurisdiction in that country, right? So it's very hard to go do anything if that country is not going to treat it seriously. If there's 3 deaths, we don't do anything. Certainly, if they wiped out the population of Los Angeles, we would theoretically think that would cross a line, right?
Yeah, who would you be talking to today?
That is good point. Good point. I picked LA because you're here, but it just seems like there's a lot of gray area there that we don't understand how to deal with, and we haven't set out good controls and guidelines for, right? Yeah. And there hasn't been a lot of international cooperation in this area. I'm frustrated that we seem to have not really dealt with this well, and I don't see a way forward given the current way we're treating it.
No, I have to agree with you. It's really a difficult thing. It's become the norm. It's just a cost of doing business, it seems. The internet, you built a skyscraper on a swamp. That's what the internet is. Yeah. And no matter what you do, it's always going to be vulnerable.
Putting the larger hat on, right? You're president of the ISSA-LA chapter. You're obviously involved at a national level with ISSA. When we think about this from a federal policy level, do national lines exist in cyber? Like, is that the issue? Is it just this wild, wild west of really impossible to regulate, and are we doomed to that?
It is pretty difficult to legislate. And as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, don't look for regulations or legislation to really do your job for you. It's not going to work. They're always behind.
So hackback?
Hackback's not going to do the job either. Now, there's a couple of things that I was really happy to read about where they were able to identify a leading Russian person, and they used a technique that the ransomware gangs were using, where they had a countdown, where they were saying, "We're going to reveal the name of this leading Russian person," just to like drive home the point that we could play that game, just like the ransomware people. Well, we're going to release your data in 3 days if you don't pay up, and so little, but you're counting down, and what did it accomplish its goal? I don't know, but it does make them a little nervous. Both the ransomware gang and the people who are their business associates, like, well, if this guy is going to be outed, maybe we need to disassociate ourselves from that person because, we don't want any blowback. And so it could, it causes disruption of the ransomware gangs. So getting creative, something along those lines, I like that approach, but there has to be a lot more. Mm-hmm. And to look for an ultimate solution, like a plan, that's very difficult to do. We talked about this before, that, we're not going to see making ransomware payments illegal. It's just not going to happen in the near future.
So we did talk about that on prior podcasts, and I'm just wondering. So first off, if you're CISO for a publicly traded company that's ransom, is your advice pay or don't pay?
Well, I would like to see no payments. I'm agreeing with you.
Okay,
I
so
know that you feel
so
that way.
your advice as the CISO to the board would be we shouldn't pay.
Right, but that you better have done your homework ahead of time and have off-site, non-connected backups. You better have tested everything to see how long the backups would take, if they're going to be successful.
Yeah, it still doesn't help with the exfiltration of data and the exposure, right?
That's absolutely true.
So you actually need a solution that hopefully prevents. If you get by that, you potentially are able to provide key data and then hopefully prevent the exfiltration of data. Man, I wonder who could do that. Yeah, there's a couple. There's maybe one.
Yeah.
So
Go
you've had time to think about it. Just getting back to the serious side of it, since the previous thing, have you thought more, or like do you go one way or the other on actually making the ransom payments illegal? Do you think that that's potentially there's merit and we should look at that further, or are you thinking, yeah, I just don't think it'll ever work and we'll never get there?
It's a nice, in a vacuum, great solution. But in the real world, when you have SMBs that are going to fold because without their ability to do business and without their data, they just can't exist. They can't wait those 3 or 4 or 10 days, right? There's too many of those businesses, particularly like California is renowned for having tons of SMBs, right?
Yeah.
The larger companies, they can test and they can weather the storm and not pay, and they should be able to somehow get their data.
So I won't beat the dead horse, but if you want to see how I come out on that, watch the Last Month in Security podcast, episode 5, because we talk in length about that and my thoughts on that. But yeah, I think that's the question. That's ultimately what we're going to have to answer one way or not. So when I think, I guess in wrap up, just final question here. The future of cyber and where we're headed, right? As you think about the next, 1, 2, 3, 5 years, like what's going to be the big things we're going to be looking out for? What are the new solutions that we're going to have? Like, what's your crystal ball say about cyber?
Thus, there will be a continuation of what started maybe 5, 6 years ago, where IT companies buying up cybersecurity companies.
So consolidation.
Yeah. That's going to just continue. There's going to be probably a lot of people coming into the CISO role from business backgrounds, right? Because a lot of it, when it came up, was IT, and you're going to see business leaders become CISOs.
So how does that weigh out with the Wyden report and Change Healthcare, right? So that was obviously a call out that they made, was that the person they had in the role didn't really have the relevant experience for that. So how do you I guess square the corners on that?
CISO's got to hire tech people,
okay,
people with a lot of cyber experience. If you're not hiring someone who knows more than you, you're making a huge mistake.
Yeah, that's good advice.
I did that.
Yeah.
A lot of people are afraid. They want to be the person.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. And I mentioned it earlier. I mean, and this is obvious, AI is going to be the big thing for several years to come. It's going to be... You
said it again, AI. You brought it up, yeah.
It has to, right? I mean, there hasn't been something like this in a while, since internet.
Yeah.
Of this magnitude and potential to reshape the whole world, both for good and bad, right? And so that's... I have a concern.
So Richard's on the side of the little kid in the AI movie who's all has positive intent, and I'm on the Terminator side. But so we know how
I
that.
recognize the potential for good and bad. Let me say, I mean, I don't know. I have a very large concern, and I talked about this 5 years ago, and it didn't seem to be big, but I think people are recognizing it now, and we have an election cycle coming up. The deep fakes are really an issue, and are going to continue to be, and they are going to change governments around the world.
I think we're dealing with a question of how do you assess truth, right? Like
we're losing it.
Like deep fakes obviously concern me, but again, the underlying problem with there is, how do you know what you're watching is actually the truth? How do you know that the data that you're being told, poisoning of LLM models, right? How do you know that the data you're searching for on the internet is actually the real answer to the problem, and you're not getting something that was fed and cultured to give you the wrong answer, right? So that's a great point.
Even without that, what are these models doing? They're grabbing all kinds of information from the internet. So if you have bots that are just throwing misinformation out there that can be discovered by these language models.
The poisoning, you've got bias, you've got
Yeah.
there's 100 different ways to
Right.
potentially cause compromise. Okay, that's good.
So then there's the hallucinations that AI has, which is related to that.
All things positive, yeah. So, Richard, I really want to thank you for spending some time and coming out today and having a conversation with me on the podcast. Really, thanks for everybody for tuning in, either listening or watching. This has been Security Gets Serious with Ben Carr, and today Richard Greenberg. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and for those of you who are ISSA members, consider looking me up on the internet. I'm running for the ISSA Board of Directors. This is international. I'm going to stay in my role as president of the LA chapter because that's where my heart is.
Nice.
But I want to make a difference and help on the international side. So you can read about my goals and what I would like to do. But whether you vote for me or not, vote if you're an ISSA member because they have worse turnout than the even American elections.
Yeah, look, no matter what you do, get out and vote, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks.